or I guess we're done with Peter.
We're done
with 2 Peter. So we've got tonight, and then next week is going to be a gathering again. In my house we can do. I will be here. So next week we'll be at my house again. We will not be having gumbo. Make that only several times a year. So it's enough laboring for that. We'll figure something out. It'll be good. Fun. And then we dive into our next series on Joshua. All right. I remembered all of that. Yes. So tonight, I want to talk about Proverbs a little bit. Kind of a little bit of a survey overview with this idea of what's the main, if you take anything away from Proverbs, what it should be. But before we do that, let's open up in prayer. Who would like to pray?
Father God, we thank you so much for tonight. God, thank you for opportunities like this to gather together, to open your word, and kind of just to talk about it with fellow believers. Father, I pray that you be with us tonight. I pray that you speak through Paul. Let everything he says be straight from you. God, give us all open hearts, open minds, open ears to receive what you have for us tonight. Father, we love you. Praise you. It's in your son's name we pray.
Amen. All right, so we had an article from David Platt that got passed out. And as you read the article, what does lack of discipline lead to?
I like how at the end of the first paragraph, he makes a bold statement. He says it had a disastrous effect on not just my life, my relationship with God, but others around me.
Yeah, it was a ripple effect. It's not just you. And so often we think that, maybe we have a bad habit or something we do, and that, what harm does it do? I'm only hurting myself, or, if that's what I want to do, what difference does it make? Without realizing the impacts that we have on other people's lives. What else does he say about the man who lacks discipline? What does it lead to eventually? Parker?
It says that he'll be led, folly will go astray.
Right? He will be led to folly, and then he will go astray. And then what does folly ultimately in here bring us to? Evil and death. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray. So ultimately, when we lack discipline, we become foolish. How is it that discipline keeps us from folly?
I think it's just the intentionality behind discipline. I think for a lot of us, myself especially, we can kind of go into almost autopilot by just kind of getting through the day and not really paying attention to what we're doing. But with the discipline, there's more focus, more awareness of what am I doing, why am I doing it.
For sure. Intentionality, I think, is a big one. Being focused on it. Anything else? Anybody else?
Kind of going like Paul with the sports analogy. When you have disciplines related to something you want to do, it helps you realize what's required to keep that standard of what you're looking for, because you realize if you do this, you're straying from what you're after. Because an example I was going to make real quick was I did a fitness test a couple weeks ago at the workout group, the F3, and I was thinking, if I don't keep the discipline of going, eventually I'll either stay where I'm at or fall off, which is not what one would want.
Right, we're either growing or we're shrinking, we're dying. There's no standing still. It's just that's this idea that we can just kind of put it in park and just hover in a certain is just a myth. We're either constantly moving forward or we're moving in the wrong direction. Can you think of a time that you lack discipline? And maybe it's just in one specific thing. I mean, not, hopefully you don't think about your entire life and go, it has no discipline, I'm just out there, whatever. And that, maybe there's something specifically that is undisciplined or that you have lacked in the past that you don't now. Everybody reads their Bible every morning and prays for an hour. And
I'll say for me, when I got back from my first attempt to move out and kind of settled back into my being back at home with my parents, I kind of settled into a place of just going to church. I wasn't involved in church, so I could kind of see, especially when I started going here and getting involved again, the difference of what that did. Of basically, I was just in a way going to church to say I was going. I wasn't getting involved because I wasn't going in a place that felt like my church home.
you're just kind of checking a box off.
Yeah.
Like, I got that done.
In the moment, but that's what it ended up being.
Right, yeah, you didn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going there just to fulfill an obligation and then I'm going to leave. And it wasn't like you were, but in the end, there wasn't a harvest from it.
Right.
Anybody else?
I think in my life, especially during college and right after I graduated, I didn't pray, ever really. And I found that not talking to God, not reading my Bible, I was I filled that void with idols, a lot of pop culture kind of things, But then I started noticing that my life was in fault. My life was undisciplined. It wasn't going where I wanted. I wasn't happy, and so I started realizing more and more I need to talk to God. I need to get close to Him, and as soon as I started saying God, I really need you. I need you to come. I need you back in my life. It's 2 seconds later, I'm right here, and I started praying more, and things started improving. I'm not saying I turned my life around. God turned my life around. When I was hey, turn around, there's God.
He's ready. As soon as we cry out to Him, that's the amazing thing about Jesus. And the only limiter on your closeness with God, on your relationship with God, the only regulator of how much Jesus you get is you. That's the amazing thing, is that the Lord will make Himself, the Creator of the universe, will make Himself completely available to you. You can have the undivided attention of God if that's what you want. And the only thing that keeps it is your willingness to spend that time, to invest in that relationship. And it's a relationship like any other. I mean, you think about your close friends that you have, and we all have, you have friends that are he's an acquaintance, and then you have friends that are oh, that's a real good friend of mine. And the difference is time. And that's what makes your closest friends are the ones that you spend time with. And sometimes, that changes. I remember my best friend in college and in high school, and I was the best man at his wedding. And he lives in Maryland now, and I think we talk on average twice a year, sometimes 3. And, we've just sort of drifted apart. I still think of him as a good friend, mostly out of nostalgia. But the intimacy or the closeness of that friendship is gone. No discipline to pick up the phone. On either side. Both got busy. And so, there you go. It happens. Sometimes we don't even realize it. And that's kind of what can happen with our walk with the Lord. Before you know it, sometimes you look up and you're like, it's been a while. So tonight, I want to talk about just kind of in general the book of Proverbs, and maybe if you only take away one thing about Proverbs is the idea of discipline, which is not a popular word in culture. It has a really negative kind of connotation a lot of times. You discipline your kids when they act up. A lot of times we think of discipline and we have bad memories of it. It means that, you were doing extra reps in when you were on playing sports. You might think of it as the two-a-days if you played football, or you think of it as detention because you showed up late too many times, or you pranked, or whatever. All the things that you get a detention for. So you think about it. It has this negative kind of idea, but in Scripture, it's a really positive concept when applied to our relationship with God. And it makes sense that Satan would want us to think of it in a negative way, because he wants us to forsake the things that will draw us close to God. And ultimately, having a close relationship with the Lord, walking with the Lord, having a godly life is work. It is dedicated, specific, intentional, hard work. And it's something that it just does not happen. I wish it did, but it doesn't. No more than, you can be sitting on your sofa watching television, staring at your refrigerator, and wishing for dinner to appear. But yet it does not happen. You have to go thaw something or heat something or do whatever. Maybe it's just you get to the point where you're like, we're just going to open up a can of something. It's just sometimes you don't want to do the work. The other night I didn't want to do any work on making dinner, and they've discontinued it, much to my heartbreak, but I still have a supply from Costco of these cans of roast beef, and it's really good. Like, normally canned beef is like, I think of Dinty Moore, which is not I don't like it. But theirs is reasonably tasty, and it's my great emergency meal. I will crack that open with a can of green beans, and I will throw it in the microwave, and in 3 minutes, I will have a reasonably nutritious meal. And I'm a bachelor, so what do I care? There's no judgment, Put some hot spice on top of it, and then there we go. And then the dogs stare at me and go, "Where's mine?" Because they smell the beef and they want it. But it's because I didn't have the discipline.
You know it. You know you give them some.
Oh, no question. No question. They love it. Then they lick the bowl. And then it goes in the dishwasher to be sanitized. That's why there's a sterilization setting, so that your dog can lick your plate without fear of future repercussions. As a hand wash, I don't think gets us to a point where I would be willing to use that utensil again. I think I need, sterilization. So anyway, the book of Proverbs, back to the point. The book of Proverbs, the Hebrew word around it is chokmah, which more literally is translated as skill for living. When you think of this book, when rabbis teach about this book, when you read it in Hebrew, the book is meant to convey to you this idea of skill for living. It is the most practical book in the Bible. It is strictly, it is these easy to remember short phrases and ideas that are meant to equip you to handle a multitude of situations and to teach you about how to have a relationship with God. If you grow up in a home that there is no real guidance, there's no spirituality, maybe you're somebody who is recently saved, there's nothing that is going to get you on the path of how do I chase the Lord and deal with the world better than Proverbs. And it's a book that I try to read every day. Whatever day of the week or day of the month it is, that's the chapter that I read. And I just try to keep them always going in my mind because they're always relevant. And they will teach you not only how to have a godly relationship and how to have fruit in your life, but they teach you how to deal with the world. And at some point over the summer, maybe when we have time, we'll talk about, there's this word fool. that appears over and over again in the book. But amazingly enough, in Hebrew, there's actually 4 different words that get translated to fool. And when you read them, if you break them out, you realize that there's actually different kinds of fools. And how you deal with fools depends on the kind of fool that they are. A simple fool is dealt with differently than a mocker or a scoffer. And a mocker or a scoffer is dealt with differently than a sensual or a silly fool that's just interested in pleasure and doing what they want to do, and that's my thing. And you deal with that person differently than you deal with the wicked fool, the steadfast, I hate God, the fool that has said in their heart, there is no God. And so these fools, they have different names, and they actually translate in a way that you know what you're talking about. And there's a story about David dealing with a guy named Nabal in the Old Testament, which is actually the word for a steadfast fool that is wicked and says there is no God. And so I don't think his parents, he probably wasn't born as, his parents probably didn't name him that. But he is such the caricature of that type of fool that in the Bible, for all of history, he's the example. And so if you're reading Proverbs and you're reading Psalms, this Nabal keeps popping up. And you're like, hey, I know that dude. I read a story about him. And it becomes real and visual. And that's what Proverbs is meant to be, is this practical book about how do we deal with the Lord and how do we deal with people. And in order to do it, the very first thing, the most important idea of the book is discipline. If you get nothing else right, you have to get discipline right. Because if you don't get discipline right, everything else fails. The whole system breaks down. You know, you can have a car that has brand new tires, your mechanic just checked out, it's had all of its service done, it's cleaned, you paid somebody to wash it, to get it cleaned up, you got your neighbor, you walked up to him, he was washing his car, and you talked him into washing yours, and it's all perfect. But then you turn the key, and there's no gas in the tank. So all of that other work did nothing for you. And so discipline is like the gas of your car. If you don't have the discipline, it doesn't really, the rest of it, it doesn't matter. Who would like to read James 22 through 25?
I got it.
Okay.
But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away, and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed with his doing.
James is full of wisdom. Some of it right out of Proverbs. Quite a bit. And the idea here that he's saying is be doers of the word. How, a lot of times we think, do we be doers of the word? Proverbs is the most practical application book of, hey, what can I do today that's a simple, easy thing? If you read your Proverbs every day, the Lord will speak to you. There will be a proverb that jumps out to you. And you'll be like, oh, I need to do that today. And if you do that, you will become a doer of the word. And when you become a doer of the word, you start living it. It's a whole different thing. Who would like to read Proverbs 2, 1 through 6? We're going to go to the bottom and then we'll jump back up. All right.
Proverbs 2, 1 through 6?
Yeah.
Proverbs 2, 1 through 6. My son, if you receive my word and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding.
All right. So, why is the acquisition of wisdom so important? What does he tell us here? How valuable it is, yeah. And when we acquire it, what do we begin to discern in verse 5? What do we gain? What's the first thing that we gain? The fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord. It's the first it's the first and most important step, because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And to fear God is to be reverent. Not this idea of fearing God isn't that God is angry and I better fear him, or there is going to be fire from heaven called down on me like the prophets of Baal. Or when Jesus is talking to the two disciples and like, should we call down fire from heaven on these guys? That's not what the fear of the Lord is about. The fear of the Lord is that God is so holy and his presence is so reverent that you stand there in awe, and the only thing that you want to do is worship and obey. And once you reach that moment where all pride is stripped, all of your own desires are pushed away, all of your own priorities have become nothing, and you stand there as John in Revelation, as if he is dead, and you fall and you realize that the only thing of any value is worship and service to the Lord. That is the beginning of wisdom. That's where it starts. Once you get there, now you're ready to learn. Because until then, your pride's in the way. One of my favorite Proverbs is Proverbs 29:1. The man that remains stiff-necked after having suffered much reproof will find himself destroyed suddenly and without remedy. Nothing worse than being stubborn. It's nothing worse than refusing correction. It will lead you to destruction every single time. Because stubbornness is pride. And when you're stubborn, you don't fear the Lord. It just leads you there. And he says here that if you seek her as silver and search for her as hidden treasure. Now, when we think about that, does it sound like hard work? Sort of. But not really, right? I mean, it really doesn't convey to you that this is backbreaking work. Because we have machines. If you want silver, you go to the jewelry store and it's just sitting there on the counter. It's been refined. It's been turned into, something pretty, or you can get a coin and it's there. Hidden treasure kind of sounds like fun. Like, hey, we're going to get a metal detector and go to the beach and we're going to walk around and, maybe we're going to find a ring in there and we're going to dig it up. We're going to hear the beep. We're going to get a suntan. Not so much. Okay? But think about the author writing this in the year 1500 BC. Okay? You want to find silver, it means you're going to get a pickaxe that you had to whittle by hand, a wooden handle, and get somebody to melt down the metal, and you're getting this axe and a shovel, okay, or a sifter thing for the water. Has anybody ever panned for gold? Ever done that on vacation? How'd that go for you?
It was not fun.
It was not right.
I was a kid too, and I didn't find diddly squat.
You found nothing, right? And how about you? How did it go for you?
I actually kind of had fun, but it was a lot of work because there was a lot of not gold in there.
Right. It was a lot of rock and dirt and mud and sediment. Was it warm or cold? It's cool. I did it as a little kid like you on a trip to Alaska. And it was in this river where the water was running and it was cold out. And you're in there. And I think that it lasted all of about 10 minutes before I was like, I'm done. Found nothing. Hated it. Wanted to go to the gift shop. That was where I was at. And they did. They had gold nuggets there at the gift shop. You get them for 20% over spot right there. They were ready to go.
Work smarter, not harder.
You wanted your gold, there it was. So if there was any good gold, they already sifted it out of there. You know that they're not leaving a giant nugget in the river. You know, that thing's been worked over by 100,000 tourists. It's gone. But the analogy, the description that he is providing here is one of really hard work. You're in the ancient world. There's no mechanization. You got to get a lamp or a lantern, and you're going into a cave, or you're digging into the ground. You're bashing up rock. I mean, getting silver, mining for gold, was really hard work in the ancient world. And when you look at what an average day's pay is in the ancient world, a denarius, and you look at the amount of silver that is, it's minuscule. These metals were incredibly valuable back then because they were so hard to obtain. They required so much work in order to get them. And so he talks about seeking wisdom like somebody mining for silver. The first thing that he's conveying here is that this is hard work. That you're going to have to struggle. It's going to be like a 2-a-day at football. It's going to require dedication. But if you do it, you will then discern the fear of the Lord. And in chapter 3, it tells us that long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor. All her paths are pleasing. She's more valuable than jewels. There's nothing more important than you can do in your life than acquire wisdom. Because with wisdom and fear of the Lord, you can then accomplish anything that the Lord has provided you with the opportunity to do. You know, riches come and go, money come and go, nations rise and fall. You don't know the circumstances you'll find yourself in. But if you're walking with the Lord and you have the wisdom of the Lord, you'll be ready for those circumstances. You know, I often think about Israel. You know, 1948, Israel starts, and it started, most of the people there were Holocaust survivors. They'd had everything taken from them. They had a pair of clothes on their back. They'd just spent a year probably on average rehabbing in a hospital because they were so thin and deprived. They were rich and lucky if they had somehow miraculously survived as a family. Most of the ones that were going there had lost their wife or their husband. They'd lost children. They were orphans. That's who was there. They were penniless. They were destitute. And most of them had lost all of their family. And they showed up to a desert. There was nothing there. There was rocks and there was desert. And a week after being recognized as a country, all of their neighbors declared war on them. And in what is a biblical miracle, they repelled them. And if you go to Israel today, it's like Southern California, but nicer. It is unbelievable what Tel Aviv looks like. And there is more tech company concentration there than anywhere else in the world except Silicon Valley. It's unbelievable the amount of technology, science, and healthcare that comes out of Israel. In fact, it is something like a quarter of all Nobel Prizes in science and mathematics are held by Jewish people, even though they're 0.2% of the world's population. He's blessed that country. But you see, these people had nothing. And 70 years later, it's the richest, most prosperous little island in the Middle East. The fear of the Lord and the blessing of the Lord. It doesn't matter what you have in physical possessions. if you've acquired a relationship with the Lord. Because that's all you need to start. You don't need anything else if you're walking with the Lord and if the Lord's watching over you because you are. I think that answers number 2. Probably. How does Proverbs supercharge our walk with the Lord? What is it about this book that can supercharge your walk with God?
Gives us wisdom.
Gives us wisdom?
It seems like it illuminates the path, so it's easier to stay on, not stray off of it.
Exactly. Yeah, the Lord says, thy word is a lamp unto my feet, a light to my path. We read, James said, be doers of the word, not just hearers. Proverbs is a practical application book about how to be a doer. And when you become a doer of the word, that supercharges your walk with God. There's nothing that's more faith-building than sharing the word of the Lord with somebody that's not saved and watching them accept Jesus. I think those are some of, if not the most joyful moments of my life, is watching somebody come to know the Lord. And when you see somebody and you share your testimony with somebody and they come to know Jesus, and that will make you bold to do it again. You'll be ready. And when you start walking with God, it makes you want to walk more. It's like any other habit. The more you do it, the more you want to do it. And Proverbs is just this practical, okay, what can we do about it today? And it gives you something like every day. And so as you read your Bible, and then you read these Proverbs, all of a sudden an action plan oftentimes will come together, because it's not just about reading it. You have to do something with it. If you don't do anything with it, what difference does it make? You're like the man looking in the mirror that James talks about. We have to be doers of the word. Faith without works is what? It's dead. It's useless. It's like a tree in your backyard that doesn't ever flower. It's got no leaves. It's just a dry stick. At a certain point you look at it and go, we gotta pull that thing up. Not me, but somebody needs to pull it up. Okay. Can we get somebody to read Proverbs 3:18? These are all real short, but I want to get somebody to read it. All right, so Hunter, you'll do the first one. Who wants to do the second one? Okay. And then, all right, good. And 15:4? Awesome. Go ahead.
Wisdom is a tree of life to those who embrace her. Those who lay hold of her will be blessed.
Okay. 11:30.
The fruit of righteousness is a tree of life. Whoever captures souls is life.
Okay. 13:12.
Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but desire fulfilled is a tree of life.
And 15:4.
The tongue that kills is a tree of life, but a devious tongue breaks the spirit.
Okay. What did all four of those verses, what phrase was in all of them?
Tree of life.
Tree of life. There are 3 books of the Bible in which the tree of life appears. In Genesis, we see that Adam and Eve eat from the tree of good and evil. And then the Lord sends the cherubim, the guardians of his throne in heaven. And he sends a cherubim to guard the tree of life. And says we must not allow them to eat of it, lest they become like us and live forever, and then we would be trapped eternally in sin. And he guards it. Then it disappears. We don't see the tree of life again until here. And we won't see it again in the Bible. The tree of life will not make another appearance until Revelation. And then in Revelation it'll say, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. And then in 22:2, John describes in the middle of its street, on either side of the river, was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for healing of the nations. Blessed are those who wash their robes, so that they may have the right to the tree of life, and may enter by the gates into the city. Wisdom is equated with the tree of life. As we acquire wisdom and understanding, it's literally the tree of life here. It's how we have healing. It's how we have wisdom. It's how we gain a relationship with the Lord. It is pointing us where? What is the tree of life? What's Proverbs pointing us to without the writer of the Proverbs knowing the name? Jesus. It's the amazing thing about the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures. Jesus is everywhere. He is everywhere, all over these scriptures. After the resurrection, Jesus is walking beside two people on the road. And from the scriptures, he explains the things that had to happen. But he wasn't talking about the Gospels. He wasn't talking about Paul's letters. He wasn't talking about James. He wasn't talking about Hebrews. None of that had been written yet. That stuff was decades away from being written down and distributed. When Peter went to the synagogue and talked about explaining from the scriptures, when Paul, over and over again in the book of Acts, started explaining from the scriptures about Jesus as Messiah and led people to the Lord, he wasn't using the Gospel of John or the book of Matthew or James, because none of that existed. It was the scriptures, the Old Testament. And Jesus is everywhere in them once you start looking. And it's interesting that wisdom literally, in 1:20, wisdom cries out, shouts in the streets. She lifts her voice in the square. At the head of the noisy street, she cries out. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she utters her sayings. How long, O naive, O simple ones, will you love simplicity? How long, O scoffers, will you delight yourself in scoffing? And fools hate knowledge. Turn to my reproof, to my correction. It's the Lord crying out, turn to me and live. Obey me and have life. I will make my words known to you. The book of Proverbs and its instructions are in obeying them, heeding them, becoming a doer of the word, is the closest that you can come to the tree of life this side of eternity. One day we'll die and we'll meet Jesus, or we'll get raptured. Hopefully we get raptured and skip death. That would be cool. Meet him in the air. Definitely. I think that would be awesome. And then we'll get to see the tree of life. We'll get to eat of its fruit. Physically, literally. But this side of life, the closest we can get is this application of Proverbs. I don't think it's a mistake that the practical manual of the Old Testament is the only place besides the beginning and the end that the Lord talks about the tree of life. This is the book that helps you get there. As you struggle and you learn and you go, how do I grow closer to the Lord? The Proverbs. Because it's becoming a doer. All right, let's journal. Kind of a couple things that we learned and how we're going to apply them, and maybe share them. Then we'll pray.